We need stability and independence at the Federal Reserve. Jay has proven the independence that I value in the federal chair, in the Fed chair. In the last administration, he stood up to unprecedented political interference, and in doing so, successfully maintained the integrity and credibility of his institution. I believe having Fed leadership with a broad bipartisan support is important, especially now in such a politically divided nation.
President Biden this afternoon announcing his nomination of Jerome Powell for a second term as Federal Reserve Chair for a largely bipartisan pick, but against pressure from progressives within his own party to not keep the Republican Trump appointee. Biden stressing how Powell's steady and decisive leadership has led to economic recovery over the last 10 months, that continuity in the role will serve the economy, and that Powell's focus remains on keeping inflation and prices low and stable, tasks that carry all the more weight ahead of next year's midterms. We're back with our panel. Claire, what do you think?
I think it was a good move. I think it shows he's more worried about stability, continuity, keeping a firm hand on economic growth, and not just playing to the political winds that may be blowing hard in terms of people who wanted a more liberal pick. But this, he knows, I think the president knows that this inflation, it could ruin everything that he wants to get done. And by the way, that list includes many of the things that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party wants very, very badly. Yeah. So I think this was a good move. I think it was a smart and strong move.
You know, Steve, I, of course, watch these things, and I'm always thinking about the right's attempt to caricature this president. And there's a constant attempt to caricature him as like a hostage of the far left. And he continues to sort of blow up attempts to fit into any sort of mold of that sort.
Well, look, I think we were talking earlier about the efficiency of the right-wing propaganda network. And so, you know, what's dominating that is the Louis Vuitton smash and grab in San Francisco, images of lawlessness that are sent down the stream, and people then pass it along on their social media feeds, and they're imprisoned into this dystopian alternate reality by Facebook, spewed forth from Fox News and 1,000 other little mini Foxes. And so on all of these things, the caricature is overwhelming reality. In the end, we saw a messy sausage-making process with regard to infrastructure legislation and other domestic pieces where over the course of it, there was a failure, in my estimation, to communicate effectively about what the essential threat is. And, you know, the president is talking about stability, but we can't have stability in a country where you have 400 pieces of legislation in the states that are attempting to roll back voting rights. Or you can't have stability if nothing is done to prevent abuses from acting deputy secretary, whoever it is, running around loose in the Defense Department or in the internal security agencies of the country. And so from ethics to all of those issues, we haven't seen a lot of action over the course of the last year. All the while, the Republican Party has gotten more extreme. The inaction to deal with the previous level of extremism which was unprecedented, just hasn't measured up. And so, like, I think that it's fine, right? The Fed chairman is competent and able. We shouldn't have a politicized Fed chair, but in the end, if we're going to focus on stability, I think the president should focus on stability, take the threat seriously, and do whatever can be done over the course of the next year while there is Democratic control of the Congress to harden the infrastructure of democracy in the country.
Yeah, I mean, we keep coming back to that, Jason, and it is true. And I wonder your thoughts on the pick, and I also wonder your thoughts on this idea that Biden's sort of DNA is about this memory of bipartisanship. And there aren't a lot of opportunities to make that a reality. In fact, the Republicans that cooperated with him on infrastructure are being targeted with threats of violence. That is the reality. Bipartisanship as a sort of practical matter is a now potentially life-threatening endeavor for Republicans. What do you make in that context of the pick, and if you have any reaction to Steve's point about hardening the infrastructure of our democracy?
I think the pick is fine because I don't think there's anybody in America who's going to vote next year who cares about the Fed pick. Like at a practical level, we're facing an existential crisis in this country. So when Biden makes these sorts of moves of be bipartisan here, bipartisan, okay, fine, but that's not fundamentally changing anything. And I think what has concerned me about what Steve has said and what I think sort of going forward is that I think Joe Biden has been his mindset is trapped in amber from the 90s, where you could go back and play squash somewhere or racquetball and work these kinds of issues out. We're not there anymore. And I don't know, for everybody on the panel who travels around the country, Claire in the Midwest, up north, whatever, wherever as we go, I've not met one regular voter anywhere who's like, you know what, I think we need some more bipartisanship in Washington. No one ever says that. No one outside of D.C. says they want more bipartisanship. What people say is they want things to get done. What people say is they're tired of gridlock. They don't care if things get done because you steamroll the other side if they actually agree with what you're talking about. So the biggest concern that I have about Biden, this has to do with sort of the other piece of him running again and everything else like that, is you can't, as a Democratic Party, run in 2020 saying this could be the very last election we have. We've got to protect voting rights. Oh my gosh, the attack on January 6th is the worst thing in the world. And then you get into office and you don't make those things a priority. You get into office, you're like, okay, let's pass infrastructure first. But you just told us that the last election is the most important thing that ever happened. Why aren't you working on voting rights? You just told us that the attack on January 6th was the worst thing in the world. Why aren't we seeing people do perk walks right now? That is why people are so disappointed and frustrated with this administration, because the urgency that you ran on is not what's coming out policy-wise. So Fed picks, this appointment here, this appointment there, all those things are wonderful and beautiful. But if you can't get back to the urgency that got you elected, you're not going to get people excited next year.
Claire, your name was invoked, as was the Midwest. Your thoughts on bipartisanship? Are people still into it?
Well, here's the reality is, and Jason and I have talked about this many times together. The reality is that in the elections that will decide control of Congress, they run through places that are not red or blue. And so the people who really care about the things that Jason's talking about are the ones that, frankly, are sometimes they're on one end or the other. And Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Ohio, it's going to be the suburbs and voters who voted for Joe Biden and voted for Donald Trump. So he's right about this. If Joe Biden doesn't keep inflation under control, if gas prices are still very high, if you still can't find a place for your child to be safe while you're at work for childcare, then Joe Biden's in a lot of trouble next year. And that's why, even though they may not vote on Fed chair, if the Fed chair can control inflation, it will bode well for the Democrats in the midterms.
We'll stay on it.